One Arkansas group has come together with one singular focus to pass a constitutional amendment to protect our Freedom of Information Act. Joining us to talk about that today is law professor and FOIA expert Robert Steinbuch. Hi, Robert. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Jenny. It's great to be with you as usual.
Last time that you were here with us, it was right before the special session. That was a hard special session. I want to talk to you about that before we
talk
like
3 years ago. It feels like it's been 3 years since that special session.
I think that I have a few extra gray hairs after that one.
Those are all new. It was all jet black before this happened.
Yeah, we made it out alive. I want to talk to you about those few days and what transpired and just some lessons learned about that special session and those few bills. How many did we have before one finally passed? Was it 3 or 4?
You know, I don't know. You're talking about the FOIA bills in particular.
Yeah, the FOIA one.
There was the original, there was a replacement, and then there was a replacement of the replacement. I think it was, well, no, to be fair. And then there was a comparable replacement introduced prior to the past replacement by Julie Mayberry.
That's right.
That was a very good bill that actually got the ball rolling.
I think it forced her hand. Yep.
That's right. And Julie deserves credit for introducing that bill. And there were a bunch of folks that were on that bill. Wayne Long was on that bill. There were 2 senators on that bill, Alan Clark and Brian King. So that bill,
Conduit we wrote an article that day, and we said probably had Mayberry not come out with that, I don't know if we would have seen the following bill. Well,
Julie and all of the co-sponsors deserve a lot of credit for moving the ball forward on that. And I know you all are reworking your legislative scorecard to more significantly consider issues of transparency. And those folks deserve credit for what they did, even though it wasn't their bill that wound up passing.
Right. We are. Well, talk to us about lessons learned looking back and protecting FOIA. What did you think about that special session?
Ooh, I'm still trying to catch my breath from it. I think there were a lot of important lessons and a lot of good things happened. In the end, everybody, I think, can claim success, all sides. I really mean that, because we came out with a product that perhaps nobody thinks is perfect, and then you know that maybe that's the right product. But you take my meaning, which is that there were a lot of different positions, and in the end, I think we drilled down to what were the core issues. Now, as I said throughout the process, I didn't think that the special session was the right time to address many of these issues. And I think in the end, that was what we saw materialize, is that we kind of got down to the more basic elements that were proper for, or more than proper, timely for a special session. And so I think that the process actually worked, but it was messy. Democracy is messy after all, and this was messy. And I hope we can do, or I hope we can address the Freedom of Information Act going forward in a more orderly fashion.
Yeah, one thing that I think did not get enough attention was the House. I think that it was a bipartisan effort. I think that had the House not held the line on suspension of the House rules, I think that things would have moved a lot quicker. And I don't think that we would have gotten the result had they not done that. And I think that was the House in a very strong statement to the administration, to those watching, that this was too important of an issue to just coast through. And they didn't do it once, they didn't do it twice, they did it 3 times. And I know that the pressure that those legislators in the House were facing was immense. and I just have to applaud them. I don't think they've gotten that has not gotten enough attention the way that it should. And I'm sure that there may be, I'm not saying there's going to be repercussions on that, but that was a big deal what they did.
I think
not
it was
suspending the
huge
House
deal.
rules.
It was
Yeah.
a huge deal. I was in the gallery for 2 of those votes. Those were critical votes. And the key is that the notion of suspending the rules, as well as the notion of calling a special session, both are for situations that require quick action that shouldn't be controversial. So, well, you
Yeah.
don't need to go through all the rules if it's not
Right.
controversial, and you need to get it done quickly. Well, guess what? A lot of what was being presented failed both of those tests, and the folks
Yeah.
in the House realized that, and they definitely refused to suspend those rules. And I certainly agree that causing it to operate in a more deliberative fashion gave rise to the outcome that we got, an outcome, as I said, that I think everybody was pleased with, but an outcome that reflected greater deliberation.
Let's talk about coming out of the special session. We do have a bill. There are still some elements of that bill that I think not everyone is pleased with, but I've said this a lot lately. It is what it is. But we've heard the governor and Senator Hester say that the work is not done, that they are not done working on our FOIA law, that there's still more to be done, that we need to educate our Kansans on why FOIA law needs to be updated. And I think a lot of us are curious what that would look like, what needs to be done, what needs to be fixed, and why. And in your opinion, what does that mean? What do you think they are thinking? What do you think needs to be changed about our FOIA law?
Well, look, first of all, let me be clear. The FOIA, like all laws and all human creations, is imperfect.
Yeah.
Nobody suggests it's perfect.
Right.
So that's kind of a scarecrow tactic to suggest that, oh, it's not perfect and we're going to make it better. Nothing's perfect. But I'll tell you this, a lot of the claims that were made just were not founded in fact. For example, the claim that, well, this law hasn't been updated since 1967 when it was created. It was updated virtually every legislative session since, and the governor signed 10 updates, 10 separate bills the past general session to update the law. And I assure you, not all of those updates I thought were good. They were not all pro-transparency updates. So it's not about being good or bad. It's just, it's been updated quite a lot. In fact, the governor's father created a commission to deal with electronic records in 1999. And in 2000, the legislature passed the vast majority of the recommendations of that commission to deal with electronic records. That's email, text, all that kind of stuff that some have said, oh, well, this law hasn't been updated since there was an iPhone created. Nonsense.
Yeah.
Nonsense. This law is updated virtually every legislative session. And it may be every legislative session. I put virtually in there just in case I missed one, because I personally don't know of one that it hasn't been updated in, but there may very well be some. And so this, but again, doesn't mean that someone can't say, I want to do this to the FOIA. Okay, but then we have an analysis and a discussion based on the merits of the FOIA, not based on false claims that it hasn't been updated since its creation. It hasn't been updated since the creation of smartphones. None of that is true. Let's deal with the merits of the claims being brought forward. One of the claims that was alleged regarding the attorney fees provision was this is just restoring the law back to how it was pre-2021, I think was the claim. Just false. Now that's factual, right? It either is or is not the case. You can pull the old law and you can compare it to what was being proposed, and it wasn't the same. Now, part of it was removing a change made in, again, I think it was 2021, which was a really modest change that basically put into the statute something that was already law pursuant to court orders. So if you want to take out that part, so be it.
Yeah.
But the other parts that they put in dramatically changed the attorney fees provision. And it's really telling, by the way, Jenny, as you know, conservatives, not all, mind you, but certainly most conservatives in the House and in the Senate, I would dare say, support this notion of tort reform. And the key plank in tort reform is, say, if you sue a hospital and you lose, well, you've got to pay the hospital's attorney's fees. That's a key plank in tort reform. But the change that was being proposed in the bill, it didn't pass, was if you sue the government and the government loses, they don't have to pay your attorney's fees. And that would be new because currently they do. Now, why would conservatives say that you, Ginny, have to pay attorney's fees for a hospital if you lose, but big bad government doesn't have to pay your attorney's fees if they lose? So
none of it made sense.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, from the people's perspective, it doesn't.
Well, I actually think that part of what happened, and this is partially conjecture and partially based on discussions I've had with people, that when this bill was being put together, agencies and localities were contacted saying, well, what do you think needs to be fixed in the FOIA? And some folks gave language and said, well, all this will do is such and such. And let me tell you, that's not all the language did. And so the people putting together may not have been fully aware of exactly what they were putting together. And certainly we know that some of the folks advocating for the bill made claims about the bill that were not factual. And I think some of those folks were being misinformed. I've discussed with you previously how the attorney that came for the government misinformed the Senate as to facts, not as to opinion, not as to I prefer this or this would be better in the future. No, as to existing historical facts, she misstated them. And those misstated facts served as the basis of certain claims being made by legislators. That's not the fault of the legislators. That's the fault of the attorney who misled them.
Yeah, it was. It was really fascinating to see a lot of the exchanges, especially I so appreciated Senator Clark Tucker during a lot of those exchanges, because you could just see the wheels turning the entire time during those testimonies. And he was so on point. He was always very respectful and polite, but he really stood his ground, and his knowledgeable background the entire time really just put all of it to rest. So I really appreciated him being on that committee for this particular time because we needed him then. I've heard people tell me, well, people have told me during all of this, calm down, you know, this has been put to rest. Nothing else is on the table. Everybody is just, making this a really big deal. Everybody just needs to calm down now. It's over. What would you say to that?
Well, I think some of it's right, and maybe some of it is not right. The part that's right is, look, we all, as I keep saying, got a good resolution. Nobody got exactly what they wanted, but we all got a good resolution. So in that regard, I think we should all be pleased and be ready to work together going forward. Yeah. But for example, if you look at my forthcoming article column when it comes out this Sunday in the Democrat Gazette, you'll see I talk about this question, the question as to what we should do going forward. And the issue that I raise is, do we vote out certain elected officials, certain legislators who we think betrayed our principles of transparency? Of course, Ronald Reagan famously said that if we agree 80% of the time, we can be allies. Yeah. The problem with that, however, is how do you measure the 80 and the 20? Some principles are so foundational that they're at least 21%.
Yeah.
They exceed the minimum. You couldn't imagine in Arkansas today a conservative saying, I really like that Republican. We agree on virtually everything, although we disagree on life issues, but I'll vote for him. Seems unlikely to me. It
Yeah.
seems that the life issue is at least 21%, meaning
Yeah.
it trumps any remainder. And I believe, certainly for me, transparency is at least 21%. Now,
Yeah.
everybody has to make that decision for themselves. And I know that Conduit has revised, as we've talked about, their legislative scorecard criteria to greater consider transparency issues, as you should. And so there will be some reconfiguring of the rankings, sort of like how U.S. News rankings have been reconfigured lately. So there'll be some reconfiguring. And I think that transparency is the issue that precedes all other issues. If we don't know what government is doing, if we don't know what government is spending our money on, then everything else is secondary. So to me, as someone who is a transparency advocate, admittedly so, as someone who's a journalist, happily so, transparency is the right that precedes all of the others. So for me, if you were wrong on this issue, well, that's a problem. Now, let's be clear what I mean about that. There are some people that fought hard to defend transparency. Of course, I agreed and continue to agree with that position. Then there were some people that fought hard against transparency as I see it, and were pushing what I saw as not good ideas. Then I think there was the vast middle of legislators who were caught up in this whirlwind, who had 3 days to become experts on an area of law that I've studied for almost 20 years and still find complicated. And I don't blame them for being confused. I'm often confused. Those aren't the people I'm talking about, the people in the middle. But those who were carrying the flag on this, I think it's perfectly legitimate for every voter to decide for him or herself. Don't listen to me, Rob Steinbuch. You decide for yourself. But it's legitimate to say, this is an important enough issue that I will not vote for that candidate again.
That's a great point. And I think you are right. Conduit is making a decision to add government transparency to the scorecard. If you don't have government transparency, you can't have economic freedom. You don't have, if you don't have government transparency, you don't have anything else. How do we know what's going on? How do we know what's going on with our taxpayers' money? We don't know anything if we don't have that. And we also saw that really, if you were for that first bill, the first one that was introduced, and if you were fully supportive of that bill, it was almost as if you were siding with big government, authoritarian government. That's what it was. That is what you are for. There's no way to get around it. And that is not who we are. That is not the Republican Party. That is not what our platform and principles stand for. There's no way to rationalize it or justify it, full stop. But also, I think what we saw coming out of the special session, and you mentioned those who were in the middle trying to figure out this whole thing. And so we see that as well. But those who were carrying the flag, I think a lot of Arkansans saw and what they don't like. And I think the House represented this as well when they voted not to suspend the rules, is these legislators decided, we answer to the people. We don't answer to anyone else. And I think Arkansans want their legislators to stand up and say, we don't answer to anyone else. We answer to our constituents. And I think that that's also going to be a big deciding factor when it comes to the primaries. What do you say about that?
Well, I think for sure that's right. And now some people likely won't be primaried this season, this next election, because it's very soon. And this is all very new. But there are subsequent elections. Of course, there are ongoing primaries right now. And I guarantee you that this issue will come up. I know it is and has already come up in some existing primaries.
Yeah.
And, you know, the funny thing is that they don't call it the people's branch, and they don't call the House the people's house by accident.
Right.
Because those are the branches in the House closest to the people. And after all, any candidate has to get elected by his community. So it doesn't matter what other people are promising and patting you on the back when you're in the quiet room in the Senate or in the House. You have to get votes from your electorate, and your electorate cares about transparency. I'll tell you this, what Conduit did, more so than any other media outlet, but I'll give credit where credit is due, meaning the media stepped up writ large, but Conduit was at the vanguard. What Conduit did this special session was to make FOIA fun, to make it interesting, right? Meaning not fun like a bouncy house, but
Yeah, no, I know.
Right? To put it on people's radars that, hey, this is one of the things that is important to me. It's something that interests me. And people understand this right more so now than they did before the legislative session. So you will see going forward, not only in the next election, not only in the next 2 years, but in the next 20 years, you will see candidates being asked, what's your opinion on amending the Freedom of Information Act? And you'll get all sorts of mealy-mouthed answers, but you'll also get candidates who say, I'm for a strong FOIA, and I don't want to amend the FOIA. And those are the candidates that are going to garner far more significant popular support, in my mind. Now, maybe some elected official is going to tell me I'm all full of hot air. Okay, let's see.
Yeah. Well, we certainly hope so. Anything else you want to add before we let you go?
Well, I think
we haven't even talked about that. This is what happens. We're like, let's just see how it goes, and then we can talk about everything. Let's talk about the group very quickly, Robert. We haven't even talked about that.
Right. So what Ginny's alluding to is that when she contacted me, she said, let's talk about this effort to build a constitutional amendment dealing with the Freedom of Information Act. And so a group is being created, and they've already asked me for input on how I see crafting an amendment to the Constitution on the Freedom of Information Act. And I've shared some thoughts and intend to share further thoughts on that. Now, and I'm happy to share generally with you what I've shared with them, which is that I think we should put some general provision in the Constitution protecting transparency and making it more difficult to diminish transparency. That's the kind of overview of the approach that I would take, and that's the hope that I have for the group undertaking. And there's a web. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, so who's helping draft the language? I know that it's former legislator Nate Bell, David Couch is kind of the.
Well, they're both involved, and sort of.
And then is who's also helping draft the language?
Well, just to be clear, I'm not sure they're terribly involved in drafting the language, meaning that because I know they've spoken to other folks in addition to me, but they came to me and they said, look, we're good at putting together a group. We know how to do that. But in terms of writing language, that's not our biggest skill. And so I'm not sure they're going to be, listen, everybody has sort of ideas and general ideas, and that's great. And they're smart folks. But I think that the drafting is going to be done sort of in a combination of consulting with a variety of experts and then sharing it with the people. This is an open and I dare say transparent process. Because if you want to rewrite the FOIA, or if you want to do something relative to the FOIA, it should be transparent, because the irony of doing the contrary is palpable. And we've seen that already with this FOIA working group that is not transparent. That's silly. That's the only word to describe it. And so we have the process is for it to be transparent, and everybody gets their say. Their say doesn't mean that it produces a change in the outcome or doesn't. It just means that everybody's voice is going to be heard, and then something will be put together. and it will be put on a ballot. And we'll have to go through that process, and we'll see if there's a issue with the ballot title. I have no idea what the title will be, but there seems to be a lot of issues with ballot titles lately. So we'll see if there's another issue with a ballot title. And if there is, we'll get through that as well, and we'll get it on the ballot. And if this gets on the ballot and it comes into shape the way I described it being, kind of a general proposition with protections against reducing transparency, I think it overwhelmingly passes the public's vote. And so, good. We've got over 100 amendments, I believe, in the Constitution. We can always add another, and this would really be an important one to help protect transparency going forward.
Do you think there's any hesitation or worry about another special session being called before this has the opportunity to get on the November ballot for 2024?
Sure. I think that's always a concern. I think there's a concern that this could be brought up in the fiscal session. I think it's all a concern. Because we didn't expect it to come up in a special session with a bill that was shown to the public the weekend before it was introduced in the legislature. Transparency is the key. Go ahead.
Yeah. What's the website for if people want to learn more about it?
It's ACT is the acronym. So that's
okay.
But I can't remember. A is Arkansas and T is transparency, but I don't remember what the C is offhand. But it's ACT, and there's a Facebook site as well that you can join. I think it's got over 1,200, 1,300 members already. So I recommend folks take a look at the Facebook site in particular and join the group just to keep updated on what's going on.
All right. I'll plug it in there for people to find it. Thank you so much, Robert. It's always so much fun to talk with you.
Same here, Jenny.